Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Perry World House. I'm really delighted to welcome all of you here and to welcome a very esteemed guest for a discussion on the role and importance of the International Atomic Energy Agency across the globe, whether it's in a conflict zone like Ukraine, a nuclear power plant recovering from a disaster in Japan, or in a country like North Korea, which has isolated itself from the international community. All of these topics and more will be part of our discussion this afternoon. There will be an opportunity for the audience both online and in the room to participate in this discussion. When we prompt you, there's a microphone in the back for those in the room, and for those on Zoom, you'll have a Q&A function. So we look forward a little bit into our discussion to welcome you to ask questions. And now it gives me great pleasure to welcome His Excellency Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Director General Grossi is a diplomat with more than 35 years of experience in the fields of non-proliferation and disarmament. He served as the ambassador of Argentina to Austria and the Argentine representative to the IAEA. And before assuming his current office as the Director General, Grossi was the president-designate of the 2020 Review Conference of the Parties to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. And from 2014 to 2016, he served as the president of the Nuclear Suppliers Group. And our moderator today is a well-known to this audience, a longtime friend of Perry World House and a most important fixture of Philadelphia and the Philadelphia Inquirer, and that's Trudy Rubin. She's a Perry World House visiting fellow, and she is, of course, the worldview columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer and a member of the Inquirer's editorial board. In recent years, she has written not just about, but from Ukraine, China, Taiwan, Russia, Israel, the West Bank, and more. And in 2019, Rubin received the Overseas Press Club of America's Flora Lewis Award for the best commentary in international affairs. Please join me in welcoming Director General Grossi and Trudy Rubin.
We're okay? Very good.
Complicated times. And this is on? You can hear me? Excellent. Well, I can't think of a more interesting and important speaker to have at this moment when everything about nuclear deterrence seems to be up in the air. On the one hand, you have Vladimir Putin breaking norms by constantly threatening to use nuclear weapons, something that didn't used to happen. You have Russia backing out of treaties. You have China not being interested. You have the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. But on the other hand, the IAEA is expanding its activities to new areas, one of which I think is especially fascinating, especially in a country like ours where we have been sour on nuclear energy, but there is a real need for new kinds of small reactors if climate change is going to be dealt with and decarbonization is going to be possible. So there's so much to talk to the director, and let me get started by just asking, where are you at this moment of time? The agency is facing a new era in which all kinds of deterrents are vanishing, and which non-proliferation begins to seem like a word that has gone out of the dictionary. But at the same time, as I mentioned, there are new possibilities. So how would you describe what your agency is looking to do now and the general atmosphere that you face?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Trudy. And it's a great pleasure to be here today. I feel privileged. It's my first time at this school, and the possibility to share my views and listen to you as well is really great. Well, you described a scenario, an international scenario that is particularly complex. But the interesting thing is that this agency, the IAEA, has something to do or something to say in so many of the current crises that we are seeing, and not only in the areas that one might intuitively imagine. Of course, when you talk about non-proliferation and you consider Iran or North Korea, of course, that would be more or less logical to be expected as in the mandate of the IAEA. But when you start looking into the war in Ukraine and the need to work to try to avoid a nuclear accident at the nuclear power plant in occupied territory, or moving a little bit away from that security agenda when we talk about climate change and global warming and the obvious regain of interest all over the world for nuclear energy. And what is the role of the IAEA in that kind of activity? Or even looking beyond that, when you think about food security and what the IAEA does in that by applying nuclear techniques, or cancer medicine and radiotherapy all over the world, which is not something that the WHO does, it's the IAEA, because we have. So you can see that you have the tremendous responsibility to move and to move efficiently, or as efficiently as you can, in all those areas at the same time. In normal circumstances, issues like the war in Ukraine or other things that are happening would not be there, and they have tilted, of course, the work burden of the IAEA in such a dramatic way. So we are in all those places. We are in Japan, in Fukushima. We are in Zaporizhzhia. We are in Iran, and we are in all these places. We are in Africa, and perhaps we can try to discern what it is that we are doing and what are the difficulties, and how does an international organization deal with those, given the limitations of the mandate and, of course, world politics and how they play.
Well, speaking of world politics, I'd like to come back to one of the things I mentioned. With Putin speaking out openly about using nuclear weapons and threats coming out of the Kremlin, does that chip away at the culture of deterrence? When there's constant talk, less now, but a lot in months past, about use of tactical nukes.
Yes.
How does that affect the overall global mindset of all kinds of states or groups about that possibility becoming real?
Well, it does. And as you were saying in your introductory remarks, that was not typical a few years ago. People would not be talking so openly and lightly, I may even say, although it's paradoxical to use the word when we talk about nuclear weapons, about this. What this is creating is a scenario where the attraction and the lure of nuclear weapons increases. And this is obvious. We see it in the Middle East and in other countries as well, in the region, where some world leaders of countries that are not nuclear weapon states openly declare that if a country B or C were to get nuclear weapons, they will be the next. And this does not seem to create a lot of commotion. So for an agency like ours, which is, of course, trying to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons, this creates difficulties. And difficulties that are not only theoretical. difficult in the sense that we inspect in these countries. We go and we inspect their nuclear facilities. And you see behavioral changes, you see difficulties, you see consequences derived from this open discussion of the option, as if it was an option. You remember, for example, that that the president of South Korea openly said this would be an option. Then they said no. He said no, maybe it's not an option, but it is there. Things that were unthinkable just a few years ago, and we have to take note of this and draw the necessary conclusions.
On that tack, what other countries do you think, from what they're saying and what you know they're thinking, might want to be next? Saudi Arabia, Japan even?
Well, you know, for us and in my position, it is sensitive to say this is going to be the next, but we, or the one who tries to be the next, but what we do is we redouble our inspection zeal in places. We do it. We follow the technologies. We know what countries are doing, and we try to be more present, more inquisitive.
I want to come back to that with Iran, but since we started with Vladimir Putin and Ukraine, you have managed amazingly to be able to do inspections at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. Excuse me, I have a cough, so if I hiccup, I'm trying not to cough. And it's been quite amazing, but also obviously difficult. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you managed to get in there, and also what you think you know about mines, being on rooftops, about anything that you haven't seen that you wish you could see.
Yeah, indeed. Well, you remember when the war started, or with the invasion started, two things happened immediately. The Russians occupied Zaporizhzhia and they occupied Chernobyl. That was in the beginning of the war, at a time where there was a possibility of an attack through the north and perhaps a quick military move towards the capital. And Chernobyl is not far from Kyiv, and there is a route there. 3 weeks later, they withdrew voluntarily, and we came in. I will never forget, it was 2 or 3 in the morning. The gentleman there, Diego, who is my personal assistant, called me and to tell me that Zaporizhzhia had been occupied. And I was on the phone with the Prime Minister of Ukraine, and they were completely shocked. There was a move towards South Ukraine, which is another nuclear power plant, which did not materialize because they found some resistance in the way. So confronted with that, what you would have normally expected was that, of course, well, it's an occupied station, then, well, we will wait until the war ends, and perhaps we will go back someday if we ever go. But I decided that we needed to go, that we needed to establish a presence there. And that was, of course, unprecedented. This is occupied territory at wartime. So I started talking to both to the Ukrainians and to the Russians, and that was in itself very difficult, because people were expecting us to join the choir of people criticizing or condemning Russia. And I was telling everybody, you know, I have my heart in the right place and I know what I know, but I have to be efficient in this circumstance. And being efficient for me is to avoid a nuclear accident. at a plant which had been attacked, had been shelled. Imagine shelling a nuclear power plant, a reactor, right? 6 of them. The nuclear power plant, the biggest in Europe, 6 reactors there. So that opened a series of negotiations which included how to get there. The problem for Ukraine, and I could understand that, was that they believed that by going there, the IAEA could be legitimizing the presence of the Russians there. And I said it's completely the opposite. When I go there, I go to what for me is the jure and Ukrainian facility. And I go there with my authority to continue doing my work in Ukraine. So that was, I'm simplifying. But finally, then there was the issue of how we go. Of course, Russia was telling me, come through Russia, Crimea. And I couldn't do that. And I shouldn't do that. I should go through Ukraine and cross the front line, which of course is tremendously dangerous. The first time we went there, we were under fire for 2 minutes in a no man's zone. There is a gray zone. You get to the last point where the Ukrainian forces are, then you're on your own. And then the Russians pick you up on the other side. And so we went there. I went with a team of inspectors, and when I left, I forgot my inspectors there. So they stayed there. And when I came back, I said, they are there, they are staying there. And then we negotiated terms of reference and what have you. Had we, as an international organization, asked to do that, I would be still negotiating the terms of reference, what they could do, what they could not do. So we created the political space. There was a lot of attention. International media were there. They were waiting to see what would happen. And I came back and I said, this is perfect. Now we have a group of IAEA experts who are there and who are going to be there to do what, you may ask. Are you going to expel the Russians? No, obviously not. But we were able to set up this mission, which is still ongoing. We have had 13 rotations from that moment. And so the first thing that these people do is to tell what's happening. Somebody said that in a war, the first victim is the truth. And we saw that. Narratives. Terrible thing is happening. There is a nuclear accident. They have killed 500 people. They are doing this or they are doing that, or Ukrainians are attacking the plant. Well, from the moment we were there, all that stopped. Like, you know, as an act of magic, not magic, it was the IAEA inspectors there. Then there is an implicit role, which is a deterrent role that we play because everybody knows that we are there. And from the moment we were there, and I say this with enormous prudence, because we are at war, they are at war, and anything can happen. So until there is an end for this or a ceasefire or something, we will not be able to say it was a successful operation. But they are there. We have a constant interaction with the management. There we can intervene on technical decisions that are taken and so on and so forth. So I think this is, and when the attacks continued, I went to the United Nations Security Council and I laid out 5 basic principles that should be observed. You may remember that I was trying to negotiate an exclusion zone. Right. And people said, you failed. No, we didn't fail. What I realized was that once the counteroffensive started, no military commander would accept having exclusion zones or places where they could not go or could not move. So in these negotiations, which became very complicated because in the beginning, I was talking to nuclear people or to diplomats. Then you had people in uniform. In Moscow, in St. Petersburg, or in Kiev, or in Zaporizhzhia, or in Dnipro, or Nikopol, wherever we were negotiating with them, or in Turkey. We had lots of sessions in Turkey as well. So you had to convince all these people. So in the end, what we did is establish a number of, or a series of things that one could not do. It was more of a behavioral approach. Very simple. You don't attack, or you don't militarize a nuclear power plant. This was for the Russians, of course. You don't put heavy military equipment. We negotiated what kind of equipment this would be. So that is an example of what we have done, and this is unique. We will see whether we are successful or not in the end. But I think we have shown in a practical way how is it possible to move when you have a little bit of space. And then you put your foot on the door, and after you do that, it's very difficult. You make it very difficult for both sides to be the ones saying they should go out from the plant. And this is how we created that political space. I think this can be applied in other circumstances. It may work or may not, but this is an example.
Well, in other circumstances, I'd like to ask you about the situation with Iran. They've been making it tougher for you. So where do things stand now with inspections, cameras, forcing out experienced inspectors?
Yeah.
How much can you know? And is there anything you can negotiate to improve?
Yeah, the problem we have there is that there has been a degradation of the situation ever since the JCPOA. You remember the agreement that was negotiated in 2015 and that was there in place until 2018 when the United States unilaterally withdrew, and Iran started to withdraw as well, until now when nobody is declaring it, but for all practical purposes, this agreement is an empty shell. So the problem we are having there is that in the past, the IAEA, to conduct its inspections, we are there, we are still there, we are still inspecting, albeit with a reduced visibility, because by virtue of the JCPOA, we had possibilities to do what we call in the jargon complementary accesses, which means going where we believe there can be something interesting, and not only to the declared places where Iran says that there is activity. So it's a huge difference, as you can see. So the political difference truly is that at that time I knew that I could count on a minimum, on a modicum of agreement among the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. And that has completely evaporated now. Before, of course, with differences, because Washington or Paris or London or Berlin, because the Germans were also there, would have a perspective, and perhaps Beijing and Moscow will see things differently. But at the end of the day, if we would find a problem with the Iranians, they would come at unison and support. Not anymore. Not anymore. That fracture, that fragmentation, of course, has a detrimental effect on what we can do. So we continue working with them, but my leverage, of course, has been reduced because of the fact that the Iranians, who are excellent negotiators, know that, they perceive this, and I think they are making an intelligent reading of the international situation, and they know that they can push or try to push us out more. Of course, we push back, and it is like a dire straits. But at the end of the day, the problem that we have is that the program in Iran is growing, that Iran now has the ability to enrich uranium at weapon grade level without any problem. They have accumulated enough material for more than one warhead. That doesn't mean they have nuclear weapons. Please don't write tomorrow that I said that they have nuclear weapons, because they don't. But the latency is there, and it has increased qualitatively and quantitatively in a very clear way.
Moving on to the fate of treaty regimes, CTBT and the Russians, and START 2, do you think there's any possibility of an agreement to keep things at current levels?
I don't think it's impossible. Frankly, I don't think it's impossible. CTBT, I think it's more of maneuvering than anything else on the part of Moscow. As you know, Moscow has decided to revoke the ratification of this treaty, which in any case was not in force. It should be in force. I think it's a very important norm. There is a de facto international moratorium on nuclear tests, with the exception, of course, of North Korea. And what Moscow did was to put itself at par with the United States, for example, who has not ratified either. So it's not nice, if you want, but the real effect is not very concrete. But in terms of the strategic balance of forces, I don't see it as an impossible thing, that there will be a movement in that direction.
Does there have to be a formal agreement to stay in place, or can it be informal? How would that work?
Well, I would say that thinking of negotiated agreements at this point does not seem to be very, very possible. But things can evolve. So I would not exclude it. Things can degrade themselves very rapidly and improve as well. What we need is a reestablishment of the channels of dialogue. Of course, that is indispensable, indeed.
Speaking of a channel for dialogue, that brings me to China, and after that, if we have time, North Korea.
Yeah.
With China, how do you evaluate the recent low-level meeting between the two? And do you feel that there's any likelihood that China in the foreseeable would be willing to negotiate in any framework or format on its growing nuclear arsenal?
Well, you know, the position of Beijing is that they still believe that they have some margin to grow in their arsenal. It's very sad, not necessarily on China alone, but we should remember that there is in principle an idea that we should be moving towards nuclear disarmament, and for a long time we could see a slow decrease in the arsenals of the nuclear weapon states. That is effectively stopping and reversing, and this is a negative trend. We see that in the case of course, China, but other countries are making more nuclear weapons, and this is a reality. So their position is that they are not the major offender, if you want. So it's a quantitative, I suppose, standard that they apply to this issue. But it is obvious that at this moment, And it has a repercussion, as you were saying a few minutes ago, on the non-proliferation agenda, on those who are outside and want to be part of the club as well.
So then, is there any chance that the IAEA can establish a relationship with North Korea, which has so much fissile material and so many, we assume, well, we know.
We should. You should remember that North Korea becomes a nuclear weapons possessor state in 2006.
Right.
But still, between 2007 or 8 and 2009, there was a return of the international inspectors. I was not DG at that time, but they were there doing some limited monitoring. It was not a freeze, but it was in that direction, trying to limit their capabilities there, which was not bad. But at a certain point, North Korea decided that it was not going to have that, and the inspectors were requested to leave, and we haven't been there. And the difficulty is that the program in North Korea has grown enormously. Before it was the Yongbyon compound. Now there are more sites across the country. And of course, before it was a plutonium-based arsenal, and now they are having a light water reactor, and they're going also through the enrichment, uranium enrichment path, acquisition path.
So if you want to try to reestablish something, where do you even begin with the North Koreans?
Well, there are a number of areas. I think we have to reestablish a dialogue. They are very, when the IAEA inspectors left, there was a lot of acrimony. They said that the inspectors were spies, and that, this kind of rhetoric. I think a good place to start could be nuclear safety, where we should, reestablish some form of dialogue with them to return.
You have given speeches and been very outspoken on the issue of nuclear energy as necessary in order to deal with climate change and decarbonization. Can you talk a little bit about what brought you into this area and what kind of reactions you're getting?
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible in Europe, where there's such energy challenges?
It's an excellent example, because there is some impression that Europe was moving away from nuclear energy, mainly because of Germany and the Energiewende that was decided back in 2012, more or less. The reality is that Germany ended up being the only country that proceeded with a nuclear phase out. At the moment, half of the clean energy produced in Europe is nuclear. Half. 25% of the total energy is nuclear, and half of the clean energy is of nuclear origin. The UK decided to continue. France, even countries that are still in a formal phase out have decided to, do the phase out, but maybe in 50 years. Belgium, Switzerland, and others. So, and not to speak about the global south. I was in India 10 days ago, and India, of course, has 20-something reactors, building 8 more. China, 50-something reactors, building at the moment 22 more, and they only have 5% of nuclear energy in the matrix. They try to move it to 10%, more or less. And I think it's a good thing, because these countries are the big polluters. So it's a movement that is positive. In a few days, I will be in Dubai at the Conference of the Parties of the Climate Change Convention, which is in itself very a clear reflection of what is happening. These conferences were conferences that the word nuclear would be offensive for the audience. Now this is changing completely. There is a generational change. Young people are technologically neutral. They just want clean energy. The Green Party in Finland is furiously pro-nuclear. I mean, things that are incredibly unusual are happening. Of course, the IAEA we're not peddling nuclear energy, per se, and we don't have any commercial interest in this. We are setting the safety standards. We are trying to make sure that countries do this in the right way, especially countries that do not have the institutional density that you can have in the United States or in Canada or in other parts of the world. So I think it's a very interesting moment. The emergence of small modular reactors and even micro reactors is a very interesting phenomenon that we are seeing at a time where electrification and the need to produce electricity is growing exponentially, and it's not going to stop. So we do not have so many tools in the toolbox, and nuclear is one of them, in articulation, of course, with renewables and with hydro and with other fossil fuel free or CO2 emission free sources of energy.
I should know this, but I don't. With small reactors, is there a different way of handling nuclear waste?
No, I think, first of all, the issue of nuclear waste is yet one which is very important. And there is there is a mythology about nuclear waste, that we are about to be, crumble under a mountain of nuclear waste. All the nuclear waste produced in this country fits in the Eagles Stadium, more or less, after 70 years of commercial operation. So that is one thing. And secondly, it's something that you manage. I've been in Finland, in Onkalo, where you have deep geological repositories that are perfectly well. So small modular reactors produce less waste. So it is if you want, it's a marginal advantage, although not the main reason for their development. But of course, less nuclear waste is better.
We've come to the point where we're going to take questions from the audience and from our online watchers, listeners. So I see somebody with the laptop for the online, but I don't see a line here for the audience. Oh, yes, there we are.
Over there.
I missed that.
Yes, hello.
Hi, is this on? Yes, okay. Yes, I'm here with the online audience. So the first question I have for you is, what is the IAEA's role and approach to informing the public about nuclear issues, specifically nuclear power? And how do you combat misinformation? And how do you communicate when the public expresses legitimate concerns?
Well, this is precisely what we were saying. It's an excellent question. There is a lot of misinformation or disinformation. It's amazing how educated audiences sometimes repeat things about nuclear energy that are incorrect or inaccurate. So the IAEA is constantly working with countries. There are specific trainings we give for stakeholders, for stakeholder engagement with local communities. There's a network, very interesting. There's a network of communities hosting nuclear facilities that we coordinate. So a municipality or a small town that has a nuclear facility. So they exchange views, how to educate people, how to talk about the risks that may exist and how to deal with them. So clearly the IAEA also works a lot with national regulators in order to give them tools in order to disseminate information in this particular area.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. My question is maybe a little bit narrow, but I would love your views on it. So it's actually about nuclear security.
Yeah.
And that kind of agenda, which came out of the Nuclear Security Summit in the Obama administration. Maybe just add that I'm particularly interested in that because I studied China, and at one point in time, the kind of U.S.-China nuclear security cooperation was viewed as very effective. And so I'm just curious to kind of get your take on where that agenda stands globally. Has it completely stalled? Is it,
No. It's a very good point. Actually, the agenda is where it needs to be. Those summits were very important in drawing attention to the need to secure better the physical protection of nuclear material. And that led to a reduction of high enriched uranium in many places where it wasn't needed, and establishing areas of cooperation among countries. And when I say the agenda is where it needs to be, is that it has come to us, because now we need to implement all those commitments that were agreed by countries, by, for example, amending the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Material, which means that they have to obey certain, provisions, and they have to deal with nuclear material in certain ways. And we send missions to check that this is done in that way. We give a lot of training how to deal with the nuclear material and so on. So I think that was a successful process, and I think it came to its normal end. I think continuing with summits would have decreased gains in economic terms, because it was not necessary. But the agenda continued, and it's one of the points where countries continue to cooperate quite well. We will have an important international conference in Vienna in the next few months about this as a normal follow-up. Yes.
I'm back again with the online audience. So what are the main reasons countries give for wanting to move away from nuclear energy? Do you think they're legitimate, or how can you, or would you, assuage their concerns?
Well, the countries that decided to move away from nuclear energy, basically it boils down to one in reality. And I think it was a result of the accident in Fukushima. Chernobyl had a similar effect, although not so clear. But with Fukushima, many countries were shocked because it was happening in a country that where one would not think. One thing is to talk about the Soviet Union, where there was an opaque system of very questionable controls and mechanisms. But in Japan, one was not expecting that to happen. We can discuss that if there is interest as well. But at that time, there was like a wave of alarm all over the world. There were many actions that were taken globally, some of them coordinated by the IAEA in terms of reinforcing safety measures in nuclear reactors. There have been many changes in design, etc. And some countries decided to freeze or to reduce completely their nuclear programs. But the case is Germany, really.
Since you mentioned Fukushima, I'd love to hear more about that, since the wastewater release has been going on. There was a lot of anger in Asia, a lot of conspiracy theories. Like I know in China, there was a salt shortage because they were buying up pounds and pounds of salt for because of the disinformation related to the release of the wastewater. So that's one question. My other is I'd like to hear more about your journey to the nuclear power plant in Ukraine, because you said you were under fire for 2 minutes. I saw the blog post on the IAEA website as we were preparing for the event, and like the roads and the highways were cratered in. So if you could just tell us more about like what I imagine was a very dangerous and harrowing journey to get there.
Well, yeah, that going there was, of course, something that we had not experienced. I never imagined when I started as a young diplomat in Argentina that I would be crossing a front line of war in Europe. Certainly not. The problem there was that to do that, there's a way to do it. Basically, you have to negotiate with the two warring sides, a silence bracket, so to speak. So basically that they are not going to be shooting at each other or at you during a very specific time frame, and you will have to follow a specific route to do that. And you want to make sure that everybody knows where you are going to go, since you don't want to die or to put in danger your team. I was the head of the team at that time, so that was a huge responsibility. So there was this negotiation. In the negotiation itself, there were lots of problems between the two sides. But when we left the last Ukrainian post, fire started. We could not know what to do. And of course, my security officer came to me and he asked me, what do we do? And I said, why are you asking me? Well, you're the boss. So you have to decide. And well, I spoke with my team and we said, well, we came here, it's not to go back to Vienna. So we drove and they continued shooting for some time until it stopped. And then we made it to the plant. That was the last episode of a direct attack on our convoy. We've had, for example, in my last visit in June, we had to stop because we were a bit late and the silence, time or period finished, and we started, hearing, heavy artillery again pounding, but it was at the distance, and we had to stop until we were told that we could continue. Now we can cross. The teams can cross. I haven't been there since the summer, and we have to do it through a minefield. So it's quite dramatic. What our inspectors are doing is amazing. They are the heroes. I had to be there because I was the boss, and I was not going to send anybody to a place where I had not been myself. So, but it's quite amazing. You go with a deminer that tells you have to follow me, but not follow me just in general. You follow my steps, all right? You put your foot where I put mine. And this is the way the IAEA inspectors go, with their backpacks, and until the place where the Russians pick us up and they take us to the plant. So I think this is it's the exercise of the function of the international civil servant in its noblest, I would say, example. And I talk about my inspectors. So that was quite dramatic. In terms of Fukushima, with Fukushima, the issue is that there's a lot of water that has been accumulated around the reactors. Is water that has been used to cool down the core, the reactor cores that had been melted, and so they have lots of radionuclides. Japanese were accumulating that water, and were not sure what to do. Finally, they came up with a plan to cleanse this water. There is a process to do that, and they asked us to look at the plan. And we went a step further. I proposed to the Japanese Prime Minister, to do the monitoring ourselves, in the idea that the international community would be quite skeptical after the very traumatic example of what happened with the accident and with TEPCO, which was supposed to be an important company following safety standards, which they didn't, which they were not at that time. So I proposed that was accepted, and this is what is happening now. Not that this is not challenged by China, because China continues to say that this could have long-term effects, etc., etc. So what we are doing to provide the necessary confidence is we have established a system which is very simple. I mean, we do the assessment and the testing, and we have a web page where we inform in real time. What is the water? What is happening in real time? So again, something that had never been done before, and it has provided a huge degree of confidence. It took a great deal of statesmanship, I would say, on the part of Japan, because no country would, under normal circumstances, accept that an environmental checking would be performed by a third party. If I propose this to the NRC here, I don't think they would say you can do it. But of course, and the same would be in France, and because it's a sovereign authority that countries have to check the effluents and environmental. So yet another example, less dramatic, if you want, than Ukraine or the war, but yet another example of this space that international organizations are supposed to be playing. They not always play it, but you can play it if you move, and if you can convince. It's the art of convincing that you can do something which at the end of the day will be beneficial for everybody. And this is what the late Prime Minister Abe Shinzo accepted when I went to explain to him what I wanted to do. And he said, okay, this is a good idea. We should do it. So, and then Prime Minister Kishida decided to accept that we continue with this.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, it does move.
Excellent. As an institutional authority on nuclear, do you think there is a current responsibility to warn future generations about the perils of nuclear waste, like in sites of Oncalo and New Mexico?
Well, I wouldn't use the verb warn. I would say inform. First of all, any nuclear waste treatment or management has to be done in accordance with very strict safety measures that must make sure that there is not going to be any harmful effect on the environment. And for that, the IAEA inspects that, checks that that is the case. And then what one has to do is inform. That is a responsibility of countries. And normally countries like the Finns, you are mentioning, or now Sweden. I was in Sweden as well, and I will be in France, which is the next that is moving forward with that. They do it. They have very active policies of informing people about what is done and what are the effects of that waste. And one important element, I would say in general, is that nuclear waste is the only waste you know where it is, what happens with it, and it's even inspected, because since it's nuclear material, I also inspect. I inspect the rubbish because it could be used for nuclear weapons. So we not only make sure that it's safe, we go and inspect it. So whereas other energy sources just kill people by polluting the air, and nobody checks what happens with that. So I think at the end of the day, transparency, information, that's the key. You have to, if you are sure of your operation, you have to be open. And nuclear has not always been open. And I think there are many mistakes that were made in the past because this opacity. Opacity is not a good idea when it comes to these activities that have an environmental, hence societal effect. Not only nuclear, anything else. Yes, yes.
Thank you. You said right at the beginning of your talk that the IAEA also works in Africa. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your work there and the wider kind of nuclear concerns and issues on the continent.
Yes, well, in Africa, we are mainly active in the things we did not discuss because they are perhaps not so exciting to be discussed. We work in nuclear medicine. I launched a program which is called Rays of Hope, which is destined to increase dramatically the radiotherapy accessibility in Africa. In Africa, 70% of the population does not have any access at all to any radiotherapy services. So I launched this program. We work on that. We work on food security, by applying very simple nuclear techniques of irradiation, etc. You prevent crops from going rot, etc. We do a lot of insect sterilization to fight against tsetse flight or Zika, chikungunya, all these types of with nuclear techniques. We have just started a program which is called Atoms for Food, and we work together with FAO, with the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome, to do that. And also nuclear energy. Now in Africa, the only country with nuclear energy is South Africa. Now Egypt is building 4 nuclear power plants. So you will have that. And there are other countries very interested, in particular in small modular reactors. Ghana, Kenya, Senegal. There are 3 or 4 that are very active. So we have a very active operation in Africa in general.
Thank you very much for coming. It's been both an honor and pleasure listening to you, and highly informative.
Thank you, sir.
Many issues that many of us are very ignorant about. But one of the observations you had made is very poignant about the Security Council.
Yeah.
It used to be much more united, and now it's more divided.
Yeah.
And there's fracture among the different members.
Yeah.
When we are dealing with complex issues like climate change and human rights and nuclear technology and its use, peaceful use, there are differences.
Yeah.
So how does one address those differences? I think we can take 2 approaches.
Mm-hmm.
One is Hobbesian, where you need a Leviathan to maintain law and order. And the other is Lockean approach. Where
Sorry, what?
Locke's, John Locke's approach.
Ah, yes, Locke.
Yes.
John Locke, yeah.
So Hobbes and Locke were diametrically opposite. One was for enforcement, the other was for a freedom of choice, I would say. So example being protection of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So here, the complexity, there's conceptual complexity involved in this. And especially when it comes to freedom, that you cannot have freedom without a free society. But a free society is a paradox, because society cannot exist without caring for the other. But if you are free, why should you care for the other? So how do you have a free society? That's the central conundrum in this.
Well, fascinating. Of course, I should have expected to be reminded of political philosophy courses that I followed in the 1980s coming to university, and contractualism, which is a fascinating topic. I would say that there is a lot in the possibilities that you have when you deal with a Security Council in a world like this, that can be derived from contractualism. Because, and I will mention my example, I don't know about others. When I went to the Security Council to talk about physical integrity of nuclear power plants. What I was looking for was the common thread that would still unite these divided countries. In a Hobbesian world or Locke or all the others, well, it was the fear of a short and violent life, if I remember correctly, from Leviathan. So here, it was the fear of a nuclear accident, which at the end of the day will not benefit anybody. Be Russia or Russian or Ukrainian. And so the point was to expose them to the consequence of that. Can you extend that to other areas? Seems to be more difficult, but not impossible. In my opinion, not impossible. But of course, it's not an area where I have a mandate. Where I have a mandate, I push.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for coming. I think the consensus in the media is that Russia obviously is the one who is shelling the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant.
Sorry?
That I think the consensus in the Western media, at least, is that Russia is the one who is shelling the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. But you have people in Russia who are blaming Ukraine for shelling, and you have people in Ukraine blaming the Russians for shelling. So I think anyone who's following the Ukrainian war, the question comes like, why would Russia shell a nuclear power plant that they have control over? And the question comes because, like, for example, Ukraine has unable to militarily take it back for over a year and a half, and they've had several missions. And you had Zelensky say that he wanted some formal UN body, like your body, to expel the Russians, which you've said you've refused to do. So I think
no, I didn't refuse. I can't.
I can't. So the question is, like, you've already said today that there's been already 13 groups of IAEA inspectors who've lived there, work there on a continuous basis. So it seems that it should be fairly obvious who is shelling this nuclear power plant. So what is the hesitancy in the IAEA putting out a formal or like official statement about who are the actors shelling this power plant and whether to knock it off or not?
Well, that is part of the political difficulty of what we are doing. So what is my objective there? My objective is to avoid a nuclear accident. That is my objective, that there is no accident involving nuclear material. The direct attacks on the plant occurred before I had a mandate to look into this aspect. This is why I went to the Security Council. Until I went to the Security Council and I said, I think these are the things that cannot be done, and I, as IAEA, commit to monitor and inform about this. Until that moment, I didn't have a mandate to look into these things. From the moment I sort of snatched that mandate or proclaimed that I had it, and no one said no, because the price was too high to say no, no direct attacks have occurred, which again is an indication of the deterrent factor of having a third party or an international organization being able to indicate what is happening. Regarding the previous attacks, you gave the reply in your question. You did.
Remind me what was the reply?
You said what you said.
Oh.
Why would a country that owns a place shell it, for example? But let me say something. This is a war. This is a real war, all right? So this is a place where there's combat, and Ukraine wants to regain its nuclear power plant. What I'm telling them is it's not a good idea to attack a nuclear power plant because the consequences will be dramatic. And of course, the Russians, you could apply the same logic to the Russians, but the Russians are there. The Russians are controlling not only the nuclear power plant, but the whole area. So again, to go to one of my initial comments, what I need to be in this is useful. I'm not there to opine or to establish a tribunal. What I need to do is to prevent a nuclear accident. And that has different configurations depending on the moment in the conflict. And of course, let me tell you, if we have evidence of an attack coming from A or B, we say it. There have been cases. Let me give you an example. We had cases when we were told by those in control there has been an attack very near. So I told them, show us. Take us there. Let us see. They didn't. So again, this is how it works in real life.
Could I just follow up on that before we close it?
Just the mic.
Oh, sorry. Could I just follow up on that before?
Thank you for answering that.
Oh, please. Excellent question.
In following up on what we said before about threats of nuclear, there have been a lot of Russian threats implying that Ukraine would do something that would set off an explosion. On the other hand, the Ukrainians believe that the Russians would set something up not to really set off an explosion, but just to make some noise and blame it on the Ukrainians.
False flag.
Yes, just as with the explosion that brought down a major dam and did terrific environmental damage, which not just the Ukrainians, but a lot of experts believe only Russia could have done. So why would they do that? It drowned some of their soldiers because they blamed it on the Ukrainians and because they also found it convenient for certain parts of their military operation. So what I would like to ask you is, how much at risk is the plant? There have been claims that there are mines on the roof. What would it take in a plant that has very thickly protected reactors? The plant is very huge with, as I understand, I think 5 or 6 reactors. Six. And you are limited in the number of your inspectors. So what do you worry about most? What could actually penetrate, or would that matter? Are the reactors safely enough encased? Would a mine break through? And can your inspectors see enough to know who might do what when?
There are different problems. One is the direct attack, kinetic attack on the reactor. That is quite improbable because these reactors can withstand an airplane. After September 11, they can actually really withstand the, and you can, shell them, but you would need, to do it persistently and without much of a. The other big problem is the blackout. And we had 7 blackouts at the plant where the external power supply lines are interrupted, perhaps because of military action taking place hundreds of kilometers away from the plant, and your cooling function is no longer there, which is practically what happened in Fukushima because of a tsunami, not because of a high voltage line falling down because of bombing or whatever. And these were quite dramatic because when that happens, you are actually cooling down this giant with diesel generators, as you would in a private place or in a small place. So that is another. In terms of the mines, we have inspected that there are some mines in the perimeter, so which would not affect the safety of the plant. Although we said it because we had to say that landmines do not have a place in a nuclear power plant. But the analysis, and we went to the rooftops. That became an urban myth or a suburban myth because we continue, and now there is like a game. We tell the Russians we got to go to the roof. No, you were here before, and then we go. There is no, we didn't find anything, to be honest. We went.
Well, thank you for your persistence and your courage, and Michael will now make some final remarks.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Director General Grossi. Thank you, Trudy, so much. This is a really interesting and many parts terrifying conversation, but it's really important that we have it here. We really, again, welcome both of you here, and thank you so much for these comments. I know this conversation could have gone on much longer. I want to also thank the audience for being here, being online, for your participation. Let me just say that we have two wonderful events next week that I hope to see all of you back for. The first is a critical conversation on the reform of global financial architecture. That will be with Director General Grossi's colleagues from the World Bank, and it's co-sponsored with Wharton. It'll be here at noon. And also in the afternoon at 4 o'clock, we'll have another session, A World Today, on the rise of the far right in Latin America. So maybe you'd like to come back for that one to lend your insights as a Argentine ambassador.
That could be more dangerous than some of the things that I discussed today.
Both events will be here in person, online. You can access a recording of this conversation and all of our other events on the YouTube channel. Find out more about our great events on our website. All of you are now registered to hear about all these great events, and we look forward to seeing you back. But once again, please join me in thanking Director General Grossi, Trudy,